Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am the Omni Viewer, and welcome back to Non-Moving Pictures, where we examine movie posters as art. Now at the end of my previous episode, I had said that the next movie I'd be examining was represented somewhere in my backdrop, and I offered you a chance to guess what it was. I got quite a few good guesses, and all of them that were wrong will eventually be covered, I promise you. But I'm kind of surprised that hardly anyone thought to look to the two movie posters right next to me, rendered in 3 dimensions. Yep, that's where you should have been looking, folks. We're going to be examining some old-fashioned movie monsters today. Specifically, we'll be taking a look at the Mummy. Of course, when I say the Mummy, I feel as though I should probably narrow it down. After all, between all the sequels, reboots, spin-offs, crossovers, and cameos, there's usually a lot of ground to cover. And I just don't think I have it in me to cover the entire Mummy franchise in just one episode. So here's what I'll do instead. I'm limiting myself strictly to the first movies of each successive reboot. So that's the 1932 movie, the 1999 movie, and the 2017 Dark Universe movie. In fact, you know what? I'll also throw in the 1959 movie produced by Hammer Studios. Yeah, it's not Universal, but it's The Mummy, so it counts. The sequels will all just have to wait another day. So as always, let us start at the beginning with the classic 1932 poster. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this image, even if it is just from the version you've seen in my backdrop. And yes, I may as well just go ahead and say it. This is the best of the 4 we'll be looking at. Yeah, I know, going with the classic one is the best one, but I can't deny it. This is a darn good movie poster. In fact, this image gives me a perfect opportunity to talk about something I'd hinted at in the last video. Remember how I looked at this Godzilla poster and lamented the fact that it didn't have a proper focal point? Like I said, usually the focal point is either in the center of the image or it's the most prominent thing in the image. I lamented that in the center of this image there's a hole, and the 2 most prominent things which could be the focal points are too close to the edges and too obscured to properly serve as focal points. Well, in the center of this image is an intersection where 3 of the 4 quadrants meet. So that part is out. Instead, we go to what is the most prominent thing. For me personally, my eye always goes straight to the image of the Mummy himself. He is the most prominent part of this image. He's certainly one of the biggest parts of the image, and he's painted in such a way that makes him look illuminated, as if by a spotlight. And from here, it's easy for the eye to wander about the rest of the image. It can either go immediately to the right for the tagline, immediately down for the title and credits, or down diagonally right to the image of Zita Johann. And quite honestly, no other part of the poster works as well. Zita's image, though also eye-catching, doesn't allow for that same level of easy movement. Going diagonally up from her to the Mummy instead of diagonally down from the Mummy to her is kind of like the difference between walking uphill and walking downhill. Both can be done, but one of them is undeniably easier to do. The quadrant with the tagline, meanwhile, is the smallest part of the image and therefore doesn't quite work as a proper focal point. And when it comes to the quadrant with the title and the credits, you could technically go there, but everything is written in a descending manner, so it's more natural for the eye to go down than up. So yes, the Mummy is the focal point, and he makes for a darn good one, too. There's also a detail that's very easy to overlook, but which I think is important to point out. In this upper right quadrant, note the background. It looks kind of like a curtain to me. The curtain of a stage, perhaps. And I think that's significant because it draws together the overall feeling of this poster, which is that of a theatrical presentation. And I mean like a live presentation, not a movie one. And that actually feels kind of appropriate given that it's set against a tagline that sounds like the sort of thing a carnival barker would be shouting. "See the amazing Mummy, it comes to life before your very eyes." See what I'm saying? Overall, this is just a really pleasant image to look at. The colors all complement each other nicely, it feels very well balanced despite being made of uneven quadrants, and it's got me intrigued. Obviously, I've already seen the original movie, but if I hadn't, this poster would make me want to. Something else worth noting is that it's a very bright poster, but I'll discuss why that's significant in a moment. Yeah, I know it's cliche to refer to the older stuff as classic, but what can I say? It's an iconic image. And so, to a certain extent, is the next poster for Hammer Studios' 1959 reboot of The Mummy. Yes, when Hammer got its hands on The Mummy, this was the poster they chose. Talk about contrast, am I right? You may recall the last thing I said about the original poster was that it was very bright. All the prominent things were very bright and colorful and stood out against a dark backdrop. This poster feels like the inverse because it is predominantly dark. The background is mostly made up of blue and purple and black, and the mummy himself is cast in silhouette. This makes the brighter parts of the image, like the title or the search beam, stand out even more. And an interesting choice is made here when it comes to that aforementioned issue of the focal point. My eye always immediately goes to the title. It's bright yellow and it's surrounded by darkness, so obviously it draws the eye pretty quickly. But the title is also overlaid atop the image of the mummy, which means as you're reading it, your eye automatically goes from the word to the image. And it's generally not the sort of thing you think about until someone points it out to you, as I have just done. Interesting choice, I think. The other interesting choice is to have the beam of the flashlight passing through a huge hole in the mummy's abdomen. This is meant to be the real eye-catching thing. You see, even though Hammer Studios borrowed a lot of monsters from Universal's catalog, they had a style all their own. And one of the things which really set Hammer apart was that it was a lot more violent. Well, what's more violent than having a hole blown in your stomach? But of course, this being a mummy, he's already dead, so it's not going to kill him. This promises a lot more than the last poster did. The last poster gave us a dead body and says it comes to life. This poster, meanwhile, shows us a dead body that's already come to life, and it's not stopping. You can even blow a hole in it and it'll keep coming. It's a far more menacing image than the previous poster. Better? Well, not necessarily. These couple of images down here that are entirely in yellow for some reason are kind of an eyesore. But on the whole, still not a bad poster. It just doesn't have the same level of iconography as the first one, though. So, to recap, in 1932, The Mummy was made. In 1959, The Mummy was made again. Then nothing happened for a while, until 1999 came along. Ah, 1999, the year The Mummy returned. Now, I like this movie. I don't care what anyone else says, it's a fun, horror-tinged adventure movie. But we're not here to talk about the movie itself, we're here to talk about this poster. And as we can see, there's already a stark difference between it and the previous posters. Whereas the last two were painted images, this is a photograph. Well, a highly manipulated photograph, obviously, but a photograph all the same. However, lest you think I'm about to go off on a tirade on how it is inferior, I will give credit where credit is due. This is the most supernatural mummy poster we're going to see in this episode. Part of that comes from how the title is depicted. This M could either be glowing or it could be backlit. And of course there's the gigantic sand face in the sky. The way it's framed by those streaks of light makes it feel more like it's actually supposed to be a face above the pyramids, as opposed to the metaphorical floating head poster we'll see in later episodes. And this of course tells us a lot about the portrayal of the mummy character within the film. In the previous movies, he was a shambling corpse. But in this movie, there's something else going on. Think about it. There's a giant face in the sky lording over the pyramids, which are not only iconic structures, but on the list of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, they're the only ones that survived. They are seen as these great things, and here is something that's even greater than them. And it doesn't look happy either. And indeed, this version of the mummy was a far more supernaturally charged entity. But the face doesn't look 100% evil, does it? It also looks tortured. And this of course plays into how the mummy, like any good movie monster, is not just a cardboard cutout villain. He has a tragic backstory, and in many ways he's sympathetic. That being said though, this poster isn't quite perfect. Maybe it's just the amateur Egyptologist in me, but this is not what the landscape around the pyramids looks like. And why is everything brown? All the colors used are desert colors, and that makes sense, but it doesn't make it as interesting to look at as the previous two posters. Then again, we're not quite done, are we? So yes, it's very different from the hand-painted posters which preceded it, but still an image which conveys what the movie is going to be like, for the most part. And finally, that brings us to the 2017 Mummy movie. And so here we are, with the latest reboot of The Mummy, which is also starting the Dark Universe. Now, to be clear, there have been a couple of posters for this one, but I'm choosing to do this poster specifically because honestly, it's the best of the bunch. I mean, look at this one. You really think I want to talk about that? No. We're going with the other one. Then again, I can't really say this poster is great either, can I? I mean, okay, it's interesting in terms of the contrast. You have a very industrial, military-looking background, and in the middle of it all is this strange-looking ancient sarcophagus. And of course, there's the fact that it's strapped down. Looking at the image and knowing this is a monster movie, one must wonder, is it strapped down to hold it in place, or to keep whatever's inside from escaping? But that being said, compared to the other posters before it, this one just doesn't grab me. In all honesty, it looks like a set photo. I don't intend any disservice towards the photographers because it takes a lot of effort to frame a good photograph. And yet at the same time, it feels like it could have done more. I suppose I should also make note of the tagline, which is actually a quote from The Bride of Frankenstein, and that serves as our indicator that this particular version of The Mummy is part of something much greater. Assuming you know what the line is from, of course. And of course, gods and monsters, that's just a striking quote right there. But even then, I can't really say this poster really does it for me. Even though it is the best of the Mummy posters. Seriously, this one, bleh. When people say movie posters used to be great and now they suck, it's stuff like this they're referring to. We came a long way from the hand-painted poster of the original Mummy to the could just as easily be a set photo poster for the new Mummy. And yet, there's another interesting progression we can see as we look at these posters. And it has to do with the mummy itself. In the 1932 poster, he is brightly lit. This of course reflects the mindset of the time. The 1930s was towards the tail end of when the Egyptology was still a really big deal. So of course they would give us the mummy right up front. But there's also the fact that in the 1930s, the image of a dead body would have been incredibly shocking. So even though some people might say it's a poster that gives too much away, really it's appealing to that fascination people had at the time with the ancient Egyptian culture. Plus, if you've actually seen the movie, you know it doesn't give much away at all. By 1959, however, Egyptomania had gone the way of the pharaohs, and mummies were blasé. So, in order to entice audiences, the poster had to do more than just say, "Hey kids, want to see a dead body?" It had to depict the mummy in a different manner. So he was made more mysterious. He was cast in silhouette, his eyes are glowing. He's had a hole shot through him and yet he's still standing, so you know there's some other force at work here. In a way, he's, well, for lack of a better term, dehumanized in this image. And that dehumanization goes even further with the 1999 poster. Here, the mummy is depicted not as a physical entity, but as a force of nature. His power is equated to a storm that could wipe out the pyramids if it wanted to, and the pyramids have survived a lot of storms. By the time we get to the Dark Universe version of the Mummy, it's started to circle back around to the original film. We still don't see the mummy, but we see the sarcophagus. And we of course know there's something in there. So by showing us the vessel which we know contains the monster, We're putting the emphasis back on the mummy itself, but by keeping that sarcophagus closed, we're maintaining that air of mystery like we saw in the 1959 poster. Huh. Maybe this poster's better than I initially gave it credit for. And of course, this is but one example of how drastically movie posters have changed over the decades. And that just about covers it, so rather than making a joke about wrapping things up, I'm just going to call this episode done. What posters will we look at next time? Oh, trust me, I've got some interesting ideas ahead. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer, signing off. All right, I'll give you another hint for the next episode, just in case you do want to guess. It has something to do with prehistory. Good luck.